Laura Hayes thought she was chasing a killer, but the deeper she dug, the clearer it became. Daniel Kline wasn't a murderer at all. He was a pawn in a deadly game controlled by someone inside the very walls of law enforcement. Detective Laura Hayes was still awake when the phone rang that night. She had grown used to late calls, but something in the voice on the other end made her sit up straighter. A young woman had been discovered in a decaying warehouse on the edge of the city. Laura grabbed her coat, drove through the silent streets, and arrived to find flashing lights painting the old brick walls in harsh red and blue. Inside, the air was heavy with dampness and dust. Officers moved carefully, their footsteps echoing on the cracked concrete floor. The body lay near a broken window, illuminated by the beam of a single flashlight. Blood trailed across the ground, smeared as though there had been a struggle, and the lifeless expression on the woman's face seemed to hold a mixture of terror and disbelief. But what struck Laura most wasn't the violence. It was the message scrawled on a torn scrap of paper left deliberately at the scene. The words read, "I know what you fear most." She crouched beside the note, her mind racing. This wasn't the work of someone who killed out of rage or panic. This was planned, staged, almost theatrical. Every detail had been chosen to send a message. Laura studied the footprints leading away from the body. They were smeared and inconsistent, as if the killer wanted to be followed yet knew the trail would end in confusion. She could almost sense the arrogance in the crime. Whoever had done this wasn't just hiding. They were taunting. As more officers secured the scene, Laura drifted into thought. The city had seen violent crimes before, but nothing like this. The brutality combined with the cryptic note suggested a mind driven not just by violence, but by control. The killer wanted to instill fear, not only in the victim, but in anyone who discovered the aftermath. Laura felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. She knew that if this person wasn't stopped quickly, more bodies would follow. The warehouse itself offered little comfort. Long forgotten by the city, it was a place where no one should have been at that hour. Broken glass crunched underfoot, graffiti stained the walls, and the silence after the commotion of discovery was unsettling. Yet Laura could now shake the feeling that the killer had chosen it precisely for that reason. A place invisible to most, yet perfect for creating a scene that would never be forgotten. As dawn began to creep across the horizon, Laura stepped outside into the pale light. Reporters were already gathering behind the police tape, their cameras hungry for details. But Laura kept her thoughts to herself. She knew this was only the beginning of something far larger, a storm building quietly in the shadows. The message, the footprints, the calculated nature of the crime? It was a challenge. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting for her next move. For Laura Hayes, this was no ordinary case. It was the start of a dangerous game, one she hadn't chosen, but one she was now trapped inside. The weeks that followed brought nothing but dead ends and restless nights. Laura Hayes spent long hours at her desk, papers stacked high and photographs of the victims spread across the board behind her. The investigation had reached a frustrating standstill. Witnesses near the warehouse recalled hearing strange noises on the night of the murder, but their accounts conflicted. Some spoke of a man's heavy footsteps. Others swore they had seen a woman lingering in the shadows. Every lead splintered in multiple directions, and none of them connected. Then a small breakthrough arrived in the form of grainy surveillance footage from a gas station less than a mile from the warehouse. The tape showed a lone figure moving quickly across the lot just minutes before the estimated time of death. The figure wore a hood pulled tightly around the face and gloves that concealed the hands. Even so, Laura felt her chest tighten as she watched the clip on repeat. The figure's movements were purposeful but not rushed, as though they knew exactly what they were doing. The tape should have provided relief, but instead it deepened the unease. The person on that footage was careful, too careful, and their trail evaporated as soon as they stepped off camera. No vehicle, no face, no trace. Days later, as frustration mounted, A startling development pulled the case in a new direction. A man named Daniel Kline walked into the precinct and demanded to speak with detectives. His appearance was disheveled, his eyes hollow, as though he had not slept in weeks. Without hesitation, he confessed to the murder in the warehouse. Laura's team listened carefully, recording every detail. Yet as he spoke, something didn't sit right. He described the weapon as a knife when evidence at the scene pointed to blunt force trauma. He claimed the victim had pleaded for mercy, yet Laura knew from the coroner's report that death had been sudden and silent. Daniel Diaz's words were a puzzle that didn't fit the picture already drawn by the evidence. But why would someone falsely confess to such a crime? Laura studied him closely, noting the way his hands shook as he recounted his story. He seemed terrified, but not of the confession itself. It was as though he feared someone or something beyond the walls of the station. His confession raised more questions than it answered. Was Daniel involved, or was he protecting someone else? Determined to dig deeper, Laura began to trace Daniel's life. Records revealed a string of unstable jobs, frequent moves across the city, and a history of minor offenses that painted a picture of a man lost and desperate. Yet tucked between these details were strange gaps, months unaccounted for, times when Daniel seemed to disappear entirely. Even his closest acquaintances couldn't explain where he had gone during those periods. As the department weighed whether to charge him, Laura couldn't ignore her instincts. Something about Daniel's confession felt orchestrated, like a performance carefully staged to distract from the real truth. The more she pressed, the clearer it became. If Daniel was guilty of anything, it wasn't murder. He was hiding a different kind of secret, one that tied him to a force much darker and more manipulative than anyone in that room wanted to believe. The interrogation room was a place Laura Hayes knew well, yet on that night it felt different. The air was heavy, thick with silence broken only by the faint hum of the overhead light. Daniel Kline sat at the metal table, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the scuffed floor beneath him. He looked less like a cold-blooded killer and more like a man trapped in a cage of fear. His earlier confession replayed in Laura's mind, but every detail gnawed at her. Too many inconsistencies. Too many holes. She knew the answers weren't in the words he spoke, but in the spaces between them. As the hours ticked by, Daniel began to unravel fragments of his past. Pieces that sounded less like testimony and more like warnings. He spoke of being followed, of an unseen figure who seemed to lurk in every shadow. He described nights where he would wake to find messages slipped under his door, cryptic lines that mirrored the note left at the crime scene. He insisted he wasn't the killer, but admitted he had done things under pressure, things he couldn't explain without shaking. The fear in his voice wasn't out the fear of punishment, but the fear of someone still out there, someone with a grip on his life. Laura listened, her instincts sharpening. She had dealt with liars, manipulators, and hardened criminals, but Daniel didn't fit any of those molds. His story hinted at something larger, a presence weaving through the investigation that had yet to show itself fully. His contradictions no longer felt like mistakes. They felt deliberate, as though he was torn between confessing the truth and protecting it. Every pause, every unfinished sentence suggested there was more he wanted to say but couldn't. The longer the interrogation stretched, the more Laura saw the outline of a pattern. Daniel wasn't acting alone, and perhaps he never had. He spoke of the one who watches, a shadowy figure who directed him from a distance. According to Daniel, this presence knew everything about him, where he lived, where he worked, even the darkest details of his childhood. The more he described it, the clearer it became that Daniel was not only controlled, but terrified. The killer they were chasing was not a random predator, but someone with the power to manipulate and erase their tracks with chilling precision. Laura felt the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. If Daniel was telling the truth, the real mastermind had been close to the investigation all along, hidden but always present. The confession that once seemed like a solution was now a maze, and Daniel was simply the unwilling guide leading them through it. She realized the danger stretched far beyond this one room. The killer was using Daniel as a pawn, a shield to misdirect law enforcement, and perhaps even to test Laura herself. As the clock pushed past midnight, Laura leaned back in her chair, her thoughts racing. The case was no longer just about uncovering evidence. It had transformed into a psychological battle with someone who thrived in the shadows. The interrogation room had revealed the first real glimpse of the truth. Daniel was not the enemy. He was the bait, dangled by a predator who understood fear better than anyone else, and Laura now knew she was stepping directly into that predator's game. The breakthrough came from an unexpected angle, one that Laura Hayes almost overlooked. During a late-night review of Daniel's background, she discovered the name of a former roommate, a man who had filed multiple complaints about Daniel's erratic behavior years earlier. The man had since moved out of state, but his notes, tucked away in old police reports, hinted at something unusual. He had written about Daniel's obsession with a figure he referred to as the Watcher. The entries were filled with unease, describing how Daniel would stare out the window for hours, claiming someone was watching him from across the street. At the time, the complaints had been dismissed as paranoia. Now, they felt like pieces of a puzzle Laura had been struggling to assemble. Curious, Laura dug deeper. She obtained permission to search the storage unit Daniel had once rented under a different name. What she found inside chilled her. The space was meticulously organized, every wall covered with files, photographs, and scribbled notes. Each folder detailed crimes stretching back years, some solved, others cold, all eerily similar in their patterns of manipulation and fear. In the center of the unit sat a locked metal box. When pried open, it revealed cassette tapes labeled with dates and initials. Playing the first tape, Laura heard the distorted voice of someone who clearly enjoyed control. The voice gave instructions, taunts, and threats. Guidance meant for Daniel. The Watcher wasn't just a name in Daniel's imagination. This was someone real, someone orchestrating events with chilling precision. The discovery reframed everything. The crime scene at the warehouse had been staged to instill fear, just as the notes and tapes had been used to dominate Daniel. The Watcher was crafting an elaborate game, leaving trails for detectives to follow while always staying one step ahead. Each clue wasn't a mistake, it was bait, designed to lure law enforcement into a psychological labyrinth. Laura realized the warehouse murder wasn't random. It was part of a larger plan, a demonstration of power meant to show that the Watcher controlled the narrative, not the police. Still, questions haunted her. Why Daniel? Why now? In the journals recovered from Daniel's roommate, there were descriptions of late-night meetings with strangers, unexplained disappearances, and sudden bursts of fear. It was as though Daniel had been groomed, molded over years to play a role in this sinister theater. Laura began piecing together the possibility that Daniel wasn't just a pawn by accident. He had been chosen. The deeper she investigated, the clearer the danger became. The Watcher had eyes everywhere, and the files proved it. There were photographs of Laura herself walking into the precinct, notes about her previous cases, even surveillance of her home address. The realization made her blood run cold. This wasn't only about tormenting Daniel or silencing victims. It was about drawing Laura into the game. The confession, the crime scene, the planted evidence, all of it had been designed to pull her closer. For the first time, Laura considered the possibility that she wasn't merely chasing the Watcher. She was being hunted in return. Every lead was a carefully chosen breadcrumb, and with each step she took, she entered deeper into the web. The files, the tapes, the photographs, they weren't just records of past crimes, they were warnings. The Watcher wanted her to know she had been chosen too, and the real game was only beginning. The final hours of the case unfolded like a storm Laura Hayes could not escape. With the files and recordings from the storage unit in her possession, she began to see the full scale of the Watcher's control. Every murder, every misleading clue, every moment of fear had been part of a carefully designed puzzle. Daniel Kline was never meant to be the answer. He was meant to be the distraction. Laura knew if she followed the wrong path now, the Watcher would vanish again, and more lives would be lost. She spent days retracing the investigation, combing through the evidence with a new lens. The more she studied the recordings, the more a horrifying pattern emerged. The Watcher wasn't choosing victims at random. Each target had a connection to law enforcement, family members, former informants, even retired officers. The web was personal, woven to strike fear in those who once believed themselves untouchable. Buried within one of the tapes was the clue that shifted everything. The distorted voice referred to details only someone inside the department could know. The revelation struck Laura like a knife. The Watcher wasn't just near the investigation, they were part of it. Someone with access to case files, to internal reports, to the very walls she worked within. The idea that the predator she had been chasing might sit in the same building filled her with dread. She began reviewing colleagues, questioning alibis, replaying old conversations in her mind. The truth revealed itself slowly but unmistakably. A senior officer, one who had been advising the investigation from the sidelines, appeared in the files too often to be coincidence. He had signed off on evidence requests that went nowhere, redirected resources at critical moments, and kept himself close enough to monitor progress while never standing at the front. Laura confronted the evidence head-on. A hidden camera, placed outside the precinct in hopes of catching whoever shadowed her, captured the officer meeting with Daniel in the dead of night. The footage showed him handing over envelopes and whispering instructions. It was the missing piece, the proof that Daniel's fear was real and that the Watcher had been in uniform all along. The arrest was swift but tense. The officer, once respected, showed no panic when confronted. Instead, he smiled, as if the entire ordeal had played out exactly as he intended. His silence during processing was heavier than words, his eyes fixed on Laura with a look that promised the game was not truly over. For the city, the news was shocking. A protector turned predator, a man who had exploited his badge to manipulate, terrify, and kill. When the cell door finally closed behind him, a wave of relief washed over the department. But Laura felt none of it. She sat alone in the interrogation room where Daniel had once confessed, staring at the cold table between her and the empty chair. The Watcher's confession had never been spoken aloud, but it lived in every action, every manipulation, every carefully placed clue. Daniel had been a pawn, the victims had been pieces, and Laura had been the audience the entire time. The city slept easier knowing the killer was caught, yet Laura couldn't shake the feeling of unfinished business. The Watcher had thrived in shadows, and shadows still lingered in every corner of her mind. The case was closed on paper, but deep down, Laura knew the truth. Games like this never truly end. They wait, silently, for the next move.